Not going to do the prayer for this one here.
No.
We're ready to go?
Ready to go.
Hey.
You might order.
No, I'm pretty good with this one. So I appreciate you all being here tonight at 5 o'clock. I know that it's difficult. I just want to make it clear that this is not some emergency meeting. This is just something that we're talking about to communicate a little bit better. After I mentioned at the council meeting a couple weeks ago, one of the things that we wanted to work on and improve on was just how we communicate things when it comes to larger scale projects for the community. And the other thing about it is that I've seen in recent years and some of the feedback that we received is that the community would like to see things that are recorded, that we're talking about the future of the city, the vision for the city, when we do State of the City, things of that nature, where maybe we're speaking at chamber, maybe we're speaking at the development meeting, and we're talking about things. The community doesn't get to see the overall big picture. I don't make excuses for what that looks like. Pre-COVID, we had those meetings and we discussed about what we were doing, and we probably haven't had a discussion since then where we would actually say, other than budget meetings and talking about what that looks like. But tonight, because we are going to be having some more work sessions moving forward on your agenda, I think it's in December, we have a group work session where we'll talk about the charter, we'll talk about Government 101, we'll have some just an overall discussion. But one of those topics was going to be about wastewater. So those that have been here any length of time, and I know it's the most favorite topic of a community, but in my tenure with the City of Republic, I have seen 22 different faces come before this council, serving on the council, 4 different mayors in a 6-year period. So this topic has a long history with this community, and I'm going to cover that because it's important, because that long history comes with a financial impact. So why I'm recording this for the community is so that if there's ever a question or a reference to go back onto how did we get here, or what was this look like, I have something for you, and all my slides that I have for you tonight, I'm not going to read them to you, but we're going to get very elementary on what we're talking about tonight. I'm going to go very slow. I could geek out on this a little bit, but I won't. But one thing about it is that when I got to Republic, it was very apparent, even I believe in my interview process, it was brought up that the sewer rates were a very large topic in this community. Not the water rates, it was the sewer rates. And so, and that the citizens were not very excited about the fact that the rates were much higher. And so I was like, well, I'm not really sure what that's associated, but we'll dig into it. And so tonight what I want to talk to you about is why those rates are so high and why they're going to be going higher. And I hate to say it that way, but I need to be very transparent with the community as to what the history is, which is why we're having a little Wastewater 101 class tonight for ourselves and community. I don't want to talk down to you. I just want to make this very simple so that it's very usable for you if you're having a conversation. If one of your constituents was to ask why, I want to make this very simple to follow. But starting with the first picture that's on the screen, that there is a wastewater treatment plant. And so you can kind of see, I want to just show you if I can get this to work correctly. That little sucker right there is the creek. That's where water has to go whenever it's done, so you can kind of see it moves through the wastewater treatment plant. The way that works is you have to have a permit from the state of Missouri. So it's kind of like having a driver's permit. You go in, say, hey, listen, I got to apply. The state of Missouri and DNR and EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, they give you a permit to actually put your water into a creek. They call it the waters of the United States. So you have to have a permit to actually do that. And just like your driver's license is renewed on your birthday every, 3 years? It's the same case when it is in a community, but every 5 years. But what they do in those terms every 5 years is they can change, like the speed limit. Like if you're driving down I-44, they can say, you know what? I think you're sending too much water into that ditch, and it would be like changing the speed limit from 70 to 55. So every 5 years they could clamp down on the permit requirements, and so that's very important in our discussion tonight. But you have to have permission from EPA and DNR to do that, which you have, and none of that is a question. And I will take questions when we're done.
Fancy water.
I'm not going to read all this to you, but there is a table of contents in your information tonight that will sit there, and we use a lot of acronyms in government, and so we have a lot of acronyms that are associated with this particular project. But what I want to draw your attention to, and this is probably the most important slide that I want to bring to everyone's attention, is the 1984, the city built its first, or didn't build its first, but built a wastewater treatment plant. You can kind of fall from my left to your right. I guess that would be correct. It depends on which screen, well, left to right looking at your screen. But in 1997, this is a very interesting topic. In 1997, 3 issues were brought before the community because they needed to expand the treatment plant. Can you imagine why there would be 3 issues brought to a community to build the wastewater plant? Because the city had picked a location on the south side of town What would that street be called? Lynn? Help me out.
Miller.
Miller. There you go. Miller. And the residents were not very happy that that was going to be located on that side of town. So what the council did, chose to go to the voters to ask them. 2 times it failed. Both times they said, no, we want this to be reconstructed at the current location, which is uphill. So basically water flows downhill. This plant was going to be located uphill, and the cost to build that plant in 1997 was $3.5 million more than if they'd have gone to the location that the residents did not want. So the citizens actually voted to build a plant that would cost them $3 million more a year, knowing it was going to take more. The interesting part between that timeline, though, is from 1984 to 1997, when you build a wastewater plant, usually they should last 20 years. So as you can see, between 84 and 97, probably before that, the city was already working to upgrade their treatment plant for some reason, or to do an expansion. Then in 2002, they built that facility where the voters asked for it to be built, dropped straight down. In 2010, stormwater bypass is no longer compliant under new law. So this is going to be my small elementary class of what does stormwater compliance mean. Okay, so if we can show this, it'd be the equivalent when it rains that this red cup fills up. This is the normal treatment plant. But when it rains, this cup fills up. Imagine if you tried to pour everything of that red cup in this. What would happen? It would spill over onto the ground, and that is what's called non-compliance. It means it did not go through the treatment plant, it went around it. So what they said is you can no longer let stormwater go through your plant, around your plant, because it's non-compliant. It's called a bypass. So there's water that's not going through that treatment plant, it's going straight to the creek. So they said, okay, so within 8 years, they said, hey, listen, your plant's brand new, sorry, but you're in non-compliance and you've got 5 years to correct it. So in 2011, they signed an agreement with the City of Republic, and the city complied to say, hey, within 5 years, we will address said problem. We will find a way to correct it. That effort never took place, and so in 2016, when I arrived at the city, the VCA, which is called a Voluntary Compliance Agreement with DNR, was set to expire. So the 5 years was up. City. So I'd liken this. They go to court. They go to the judge. The judge says, I'll tell you what, you're on 5 years probation as long as you don't violate the law. There's no fines. You're not going back to jail. Not the situation here, but kind of the same similarity. You've been giving some court order that says you have to comply within a certain period. If you meet those requirements, we'll just remove the probation from your name. Does that make any sense at all? Like, hey, we're out of trouble. The city did not meet that. So basically you go back to the judge. In this situation, DNR says, listen, can we get, which is what I did, went back to them and said, can we get a 5-year extension? I need a little bit of time to figure out why this is not taking place. I'm new to the city. Here's what we go there and say, listen, what we'll do is we'll allow you a 5-year extension. So in 2017, it says 18, but they actually started work in 18. But in 17, we went to Burns & McDonald, hired an engineer to figure out why. What is causing the city to have this situation where when it rains, or what is the problem that the DNR has identified that we're in the naughty list. So we spent approximately $3 million to identify. The city did not even know where all the manholes were, manholes being where, and the sewer collection system, flow line elevations, just the general location of everything. So we spent a lot of money to identify how many gallons flowed through each line, and they told us here's what the situation is. Here's where your gaps are. This is what it's going to take. So in January of 2020, myself, Andrew, we went and met with DNR. We went to the judge, if you will, and said, listen, here's the plan. We've identified what the problem is, but we're running out of time. It's 2016. You obviously know by 2021, the 5-year compliance, we're not going to make it. We're asking for grace. We will take care of this, but thank you for giving us the 5 years. Here's our plan. They were very agreeable to us because we had a plan in place. So in January is when the very next day, those that were here, Jen, you had not even been elected yet. You came to the meeting just learning because you knew that it was running unopposed, and and it was just all 4 hours of stuff, if you recall. So then COVID hits, and so we start working on what do we do for addressing the need, because obviously what we agreed to in January 2020 when we met with you all, that it was going to cost roughly in the ballpark of $50 million. So anyway, we created, and Jen, you asked, Councilwoman Mitchell asked, what are we going to do for the community? I'm sorry, I don't have my, in front of you. So what we said was, how are we going to communicate this to the community? How do we tell them what is going on? So we created this publication that went out in 2020 that actually communicated to the citizens this story in a lot of ways, and that rates were probably going to have to go up, but that we were analyzing this, but there would be more information that would be coming about from the situation or the issue, and just want to make sure everybody understood this was not something that was necessarily a decision that the city was trying to impose upon its residents. And so this publication went out. Obviously, March of 2020 happens, COVID, everything shuts down. In the middle of all that discussion that we had in January of 2020 as a collective body was the rate increases that had to be implemented to cover said cost of the improvement to the wastewater plant. What we did and what we brought to this council was, listen, right now the time is not right with COVID shutting down. People could not pay their utility bills. We're like, to impose a wastewater increase at this time, we're going to have to delay said increases until, which we did this year until 2021, and so to 2022. And anyway, so what was last year? AOC, the administrative order of consent. So this is where the mayor said, this is the one I'm going to sign to make sure I don't go to jail. Once we signed that in 2021, it gave us a timeline of April of 2025 to have the wastewater treatment plant where no longer the red cup was overflowing the little cup. So basically you had to stop your stormwater from causing all that problem. So we come up with a plan with our engineers to do that. And the tentative groundbreaking for that, I believe, is April of 2023. So that's kind of the overview, just to give you a little bit of the history of what got us here. But if one thing that I want to draw attention that's very, the mayor always asks me, what questions should we be asking, that I would tell that I would ask is, the interesting part is the plant that was upgraded in 2002 didn't even make it for 8 years. These plants are made to be there for 20, and the debt service was for 20. And so to be in non-compliance in 8 years is very atypical. So the plant was built in '84. This is something worth noting. The plant has 139 miles of lines underneath the streets. So sewer lines that run to that plant represent 139 miles. If I was to put a price tag to you for that, if we were to replace that today, it's just south of $100 million if we had to relocate or to replace them. The elevation, I'll get into that in just a minute, but I've already talked to you what out of compliance means. Out of compliance basically means the terms, if you've broken the speed limit, the permit that they've given you to have a driver's license, you violated all that, you're driving over speed limit, you've been given a ticket. That's what out of compliance means in the terms of what we all see every single day. But what a wastewater treatment plant does, it basically just treats the water from what leaves our house. People don't realize it once they flush, it goes down the ground, comes out to that plant, and it must meet certain limits before it goes to the waters of the United States. This is the interesting part of what happened from 1984 and what happened in the vote of the people. So there's 13 lift stations. The elevation at Schuler Creek is 1162. I'm not going to go into elevations. It won't matter. But this is what I want to show you. This is what a pump looks like. This is what a lift station looks like. So some people are like, what is a lift station? What does that thing do? Well, through the pump, you can see employee Chad Kleinlein loves the fact that he's had pictures being taken for tonight. But they literally went out there for me and actually pulled one of the pumps out. There's a crane that you can see that they lift these out. But these are very large pumps. So we're talking at the last meeting, why does it cost $127,000? That one pump right there to repair it is about $127,000. How many's in there? 4? So there's 4 of those in that one lift station. We have 13 of these lift stations. So as you can see, all those components, Councilmember Franklin, you know what those all represent. What? Electricity. So we're mechanically moving wastewater around our community versus through gravity, which is, again, going back to 2002, no complaint to the vote of the people, but that's the choice, was to move a lot of that uphill. So this is the elevation change, and I'm just going to show you the picture. That one on the right is where the lift station is located, the wastewater plant. So you can see the elevation change. One thing that's very important, very interesting, did you know that this property we actually stand on right here is the highest point in Greene County? So basically everything that goes to your left, or to your right, my left, everything goes to my right, your left, goes to Table Rock. Everything that goes this way goes to Stockton Lake. So if you go out there, if you decide to dump a gallon of water on the ground, it's likely to go to Stockton Lake first, if it even made it there. But at the same time, that's the elevation change. So as you can see, when you move it from Miller Street all the way across to out by where the elementary schools are in the same vicinity, that's quite an elevation change that we're moving a lot of water. So you can see that that's one of the biggest challenges. most plants, it should go like gravity. Water seeks its path of least resistance. In our situation, it has to go up. So that's a very expensive compromise. This slide is just something for you to see that it just showing this is Brookline North to the very top of your page. What you can see there is the blue line means it is being pumped. The green line means it's gravity. So all that means is there's a whole lot going on. It flows down to one spot, it's pumped to another. It might gravity to another spot. Gravity means it goes naturally to another. So I think it was one time we saw that a gallon of water, a gallon of wastewater could be pumped up to 6 to 9 times before it ever reaches the plant. So if somebody flushes it at their house, by the time it gravities to one pump, it flows to another pump and to another pump. So that's pretty much why it is a very expensive compromise. So whenever the cost to treat wastewater in this community was not so much the treatment, it's how it actually gets to the plant itself. So what is inflow and infiltration? So what's causing the water to flow into the plant? This is I&I. You hear us use the term I&I. So this is all these pipes underneath the ground. They don't normally have holes in them. They're not made to have holes in them. But when it rains, what happens is there's cracks in these 139 miles of pipe. And so naturally over time, the earth shifts. It freezes in the winter. Just a little bit of shift in the ground can just create enough crack. These are very over-illustrated holes, but for those that are watching online or watching on TV, the point is made that if you take this and bury it under the ground with smaller holes, water permeates through this to the tune of what happens is during a rain event, the ground gets saturated, soaks to the ground, it finds every crack in this system and is flowing into it. The other little nugget that's very interesting that communities, this is not just isolated to Republic, but citizens have a known knowledge. They'll hook their eave spouts or their sump pumps in their basements. They'll be hooked to their sewer system, so if they begin to fill up, they pump them right into the sewer system. And that ultimately is going to the wastewater plant. So what's happening is the wastewater flow, the volume of water that leaves our houses and our properties, or is stormwater that's running off the streets, is likely finding our system. That's why we hired an engineer to identify where are these areas that are showing us during rain events. Where is it actually identifying? Which it did. It told us where those areas were. But a lot of that is you actually have some houses that have actually got every bit of that on their roof. Every time it rains, instead of running out across your driveway, it's actually going right into the city's sewer system. It's called an illicit connection. Basically, it's not supposed to be there. Maybe when they built it, they didn't want it pumping across the ground, so they think, hey, it's no big deal. Just put it into this little white pipe over here. But cities, I mean, this is not something that I would tell you. Bypasses and stormwater is not uncommon to this city. I've been doing this my entire career. I can safely tell you I&I is a problem for a lot of people. And the reason why it's a problem for a lot of people is because it's overlooked, because there's not going to be a ribbon cutting if you go and replace sewer line underneath the street. Just it's that simple. I mean, you ever go to a groundbreaking for a wastewater plant, you just don't see a lot of people are like, okay, how's this going to help? So it's one of those things. It's just, it gets overlooked until there's a problem, until you're in a compliance order and says, well, who was asleep at the wheel? Why didn't it get taken care of? And so in this situation, it's a very costly fix. But this is the piece that I would ask. This is one of those mayor questions that would say, David, what are we not asking? Or what does this slide mean? And I showed this slide about 8 months ago, and the mayor said, David, what is it that keeps you all up at night? It was probably this slide back in October of 2021 that I saw that was a concern. So basically, what's a concern is every 5 years, your permit, like I said, you lose your driver's license, you go in, they say, hey, listen, guess what? You got to now have 20/20 vision, hop on one leg for 30 seconds for 1 minute before you get your driver's test. That's what's happening on these permits. Every 5 years, the government can change, the parameters, because they're saying, listen, you got to do something different. And you change that at a wastewater plant costs big time money. So the city has this thing over here to the left, says we monitor for phosphorus. Our plant is not necessarily designed to take care of all the phosphorus problem. That one means 1 part per million. So they're saying, hey, guess what? You're going to have to start meeting a new requirement in your treatment plant. So now we got two problems. We got the water flowing over onto the ground. Now we got this new speed limit that our plant's not even, you got a car that's meant to go 50 and they're asking you to go 65. It's not made to do that. And so to fix it, it costs a lot of money. Then the other thing that caught my attention in our team is this little thing right here, this TKN. It has monitor. That was never in the permit. So once you can see a trend here. Once they put monitor in the permit, guess what's coming in the future? they're going to start adding a limit. So a new speed limit is, so every 5 years. So how are you going to build a plant if every 5 years you don't know what's changing? So you have to anticipate based upon what the data and what the DNR and the staff is telling you. So this little slide that we got from DNR, from our engineers, kind of told us the target is moving. Our conversations with DNR, we stay very much in contact with them, are constantly moving as well. It's not that they're trying to make it difficult, but this is one of those things, and I won't get into that soapbox tonight, and I'd be more happy to answer that question. Is it reasonable? I don't want to get into that conversation tonight, but it is something that's worth discussing, because environmental policy is good, but at the same time, unless you can demonstrate it has a benefit to the community and to the overall impact of the environment, that's something that has to be discussed and debated, and Andrew's going to say, be quiet. So, the financing. So I want to go through this real quick, not because I just want to jump over it. I want to give you time to ask any questions. But the financing, the first rate increase was slated to be in March of 2020. Obviously, COVID hit. We asked this council to delay that. We did not initiate the rate increases until January 2022. It goes back to this slide down here on my bottom left. We were sitting in Kansas City in September, October of last year when we found out the overall cost, and that's also when that slide became apparent. And that's when I realized there was going to be a much larger need than what we've been told before, because that had changed when presented to DNR. So we got together, they presented it, we're sitting there around a table with our engineers of what it was going to take to address those changes, and not just stormwater, those changes in limits. And so in January of October of 21, we made the bold request to ask for $100 million in ARPA funds. We made that no secret. We told that we needed to ask for additional funding to address the need that was going to be taking place in the wastewater plant. Plus, we'd already had the way the ARPA funds work is you have to spend them by 2026. We were prepared. We had the engineering report. So we went and asked for that. Then the first rate increase went into effect January 2022. We secured the first $45 million in special obligation bonds in February 2022. June of 22, the governor signs the bill that provides us the first $25 million with no guarantee for the remainder of any of the funds that we have. We did ask for $100 million. So we're still looking for a 50% match. So the second rate increase, because we delayed the one back in March of 2020, goes into effect January of 2023. Now, mind you, it's hard to say it this way, but this is the way to describe it. We've already borrowed the money that we have to pay back. So this rate increase is needed to even pay the loan on the first $45 million. So when the mayor and I were talking about it, he'd say, David, clarify, what do you say, minimize the impact? I kept saying minimize the impact to the residents. What I'm saying is in this story, and I'm going to show you in this slide, the wastewater treatment plant is a $90 million project. CIP 6, which is a lift station, is a $9 million project. All of these right there, all those projects right there, CIP 6, 7, and 3, all equal $107 million. With the funding we've secured right now, we have secured $70 million. So you can see that the other $37 million, as we go back to asking for the legislature to become involved, because our growth is dependent upon those things, that is the delta, that is the difference, is $37 million of just what we need to do to bring it up to speed. So the $25 million did help offset what the rate increases are going to be. But when we go back to the legislature again this year, we're asking for the funds again. And that's what we told them last year is we'll come back, we'll demonstrate what we've done with the money, but what you needed was a 50% match. Our assurance to this council, to this community, and to each other is that we'll continue to be asking for those funds like we did last year. We were successful to get $25 million. Could you imagine if we didn't get anything? I mean, it's like we were thankful, and I don't want to say that we weren't thankful, because we were thankful. I mean, extremely grateful for the funds, but at the same time, when you understand the impact, the rate increases that are average that most residents are going to see are going to range, just in January 2023, are going to range from $12 to $16 a month. And what I would tell you is that's just to take care of what we have to address the loans that we have now. To make the other $37 million worth of needs are likely to go up significantly again to cover that $37 million. All to go back and meet that little number right there. That's what keeps me up at night, because that's going to be a challenge that we have to deal with. I've said this before. This is not just Republic. I'll say it all over the country. Wastewater bills are going to be closer to what your cell phone bill, your electric bill, maybe not that high, environmental policy is changing. And the more environmental policy changes and people are calling for conservation and things of that nature, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not here to talk anything negatively about it, but it comes at a price tag, not just associated with water running onto the ground. And so what we wanted to make sure tonight is just to give you the background, the why, and the future of what we continue to have to work with. Now there's one more piece of this overall presentation that's not even included in that. There's a $40 million project just to go from Brookline to the wastewater plant, that is actually the future of what would happen to make sure that the city never finds himself in that position again. That's not even included. So when someone says, well, you asked for actually asked for $150 million. And we got looked at a little crazy. I don't blame them. But it was concerning when we were there last October with the engineers. But that $40 million is what the difference of like, well, how'd you get to 150 if it's a total cost of 107? Because we actually left that project out. Now let me say this. What's important, like we did with the public safety sales tax, we did not ask, if you recall, when we did the public safety sales tax, we asked for a 1 cent the first time. We rolled it back to 3/4 because it's like, well, if you needed only 3/4, why'd you ask for 1? Because we needed 1. Our hope is that the growth would meet it. With the growth rate that we have, we've facilitated a 20% growth rate in the wastewater treatment plant design. But what we used was a 3% escalator on the revenue. Now, I'm not going to get into math tonight, but anyway, you can see the discrepancy is that we built a lot in for the growth of the community, but we were very conservative on the revenue of the city. We actually believe that we're actually going to grow a large portion of our revenue that will help us pay off the debt service. So we do not want to do a bunch of rate increases that may not even be necessary if the growth continues to move. So same way, before you just jump into rate 1, 2, and 3, it's kind of one of those things that we're like, let's deal with what's in front of us and let's see how the growth increases our revenue in the community. So with that, there's only one other piece that's not included in the presentation, and it just comes to my mind, is that I'm going to back up for you. Chris, thank you for pulling this together and all the staff that pulled this together. In 2007 and 2012, I think the city consolidated Brookline into its community. And with that, it was never designed when they built the plant in 2002, so you can see that in 2002, it's when they upgraded it. They consolidated in 2012. So the new plant that was even built, or the things they were addressing in 2010, were not meant to handle the consolidation that were Amazon, Convoy of Hope. They were never meant to go through all those facilities. So why we're having to upgrade facilities, like why were you having to pay so much for a lift station? Because when Brookline came on board, all that water and all that sewage that came from that part of the community came through these older areas of town. And so this is why I showed you the North Brookline map right there. All of that was never intended. So you can see it does not take a direct path. So there's Brookline, there's the wastewater plant. You notice there is no clear path from there to that location. Everything has to go through the old system. So again, a lot of planning and challenges that may or may not. I'm not here to point fingers. I'm just here to bring the education as to why. Some people would ask me, why are our sewer rates so high? That map right there will explain how much it's just pumped. There's 18 miles of what we call forced main. Forced main means you don't want to connect to it. It means it's when it comes out of the pump and it's pumped up the hill, which means it's under pressure. So if you hooked your house to that, your toilets would be boiling and you'd have it flying all over the place. So we can't even use 18 miles of it to connect. So somebody's like, there's a sewer line running through my yard. It's a forced main. So high pressure, it's pressurized. It's not the kind of pressure you need. So anyway, why do I do this? Why am I having this thing tonight? It's because I do feel for elected officials in these capacities, and I do feel for the residents that are going to see this, and I believe to see it in their bill. And the timing of it is hard because it's tough times. I mean, it's like we're seeing groceries are up 13%. Our inflation to run these facilities, electricity is up. Our job is to do the best thing that we can to provide you the guidance that you need to stay in compliance with that. Because my argument is this: had that been transparently stated from the beginning, I do not believe, I struggle to believe that if citizens knew that my bill could be $100 a month, would I have supported a ballot measure to put that wastewater plant in the location? We can't change that. We can't change it. To move that plant would cost $100 million just to relocate the lines. There's 39 miles. But I want you to be equipped with information versus just, hey, the mayor says it to me all the time, what's the word? Don't impute your knowledge because you know all this. Don't assume that people know what I means. Don't assume that people even know what a permit means. But it's important for you to understand why the rates are so high. I'm not blaming the past. I'm just saying that is what's directing it. And we have to correct those things that were not done in 2011. So when someone says that compliance order came out and we were on probation with the judge, we just said, it's the best we got. And the judge comes with fines. So when the mayor signed that agreement last year, it had fines in there. If we don't meet it in April 2025, we signed that we would accept fines on a daily basis until we were compliant. So I appreciate the staff that have worked very hard on this. I appreciate this council that has let us spend taxpayer money to the tune of about $3.5 million just on engineering to get you to know the why. But we didn't raise rates since 2011. People are like, why weren't we raising them sooner? We didn't know why. You can't just start throwing money at a problem and say we got to know what the why is. So we chose not to do anything for a while. And if that was incorrect, that's on me. But I was like, listen, if I don't know what we're trying to address and we're just throwing blindly at a dartboard, that's not wise use. And quite frankly, you're just fabricating it. You're trying to explain, well, we'll get it. We've given you the target. But I know the question the mayor is asking, what are we not asking? So with that, I'll entertain any questions that you might have. But when it comes to it, let me say this last point, and I'll take the questions, is there is a document that's been provided to you. The one thing that we did, Councilmember Franklin, I appreciate your comments a couple meetings ago, getting it on a Thursday and having 4 days to review something. So the rate increases are not the public meetings. There'll be public meeting, public hearing, and then a reading. That's how rate increases work in the community. But we wanted to give adequate time to explain this in a document. There's an instrument or a document in front of you tonight that talks about the history of all this. There's just not enough time. And I just didn't want to cram a bunch of stuff in there, trying to make it as simple as possible. But anyway, Andrew will be communicating that. If you have any questions regarding that information, what's in this information, I would encourage you between now and October 4th, contact Andrew, contact myself, contact Karen, contact Garrett Brickner. We're a wealth of information on the subject matter. But again, I'm here to answer any questions and be in front of it just because I know that historically over my career that goes all the way for quite a while now, rate increases are just not fun. They're not fun in my capacity, but I think you got to get in front of them and explain the why. And this is the why. And so I'd be more than happy to answer any questions regarding the subject, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, sir. We look at things a little bit differently, you and I. You look at it from a very positive point of view, and I tend to look at things from a negative point of view. And I apologize, that's just kind of where my brain goes. And I always like to know what's the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
And if we know what the worst case scenario is, we can kind of start working back from there and figure out, you've done a great job of explaining where we're at and what we're doing and where we're going. What happens if we don't?
Okay, so that's a great question. And I did not anticipate that one. But what happens if we don't? Because I don't like to use the ultimatum. But because you've signed the administrative order of consent. So administrative order of consent is identified through 40 CFR, Code of Federal Regulations, as you know. So basically, the administrative order of consent pretty much tells you that your permit could be pulled, which you have no authority, which you're operating on an expired permit, which could mean if you're violating your permit, you will be fined on a daily basis until the situation is rectified.
Are we talking a $20 fine?
$250. It could be up to $250 a day per violation. So you have in all those little nice little pieces of paper. Sorry. So all those parameters, BOD, TS, all that on the left, that parameter, you could be up to violation for all of those for up to $250 a day. I could be incorrect on the total number. But just to give you an example, my experience has taught me historically over my career, it could be $250 per day per violation. So BOD, TSS, E. coli, oil and grease, ammonia, total P, TKEN, copper, and cyanide, $250 a day. So, and it could go up to $10,000 a day. So it's basically, are you being grossly non-compliant? Are you just thumbing your nose? But when you've had 10 years to correct it and you've signed, listen, we didn't do anything for 10 years. They've kind of run out of real estate saying, hey, we'll give you 3 to fix it.
Is there a certain point that they will just come in and take over?
That's very unlikely.
Okay.
I mean, I think we've demonstrated that we brought in a control back to the city. That's why we went in January after we did the study. Hey, listen, we understand this has not been addressed or not been done. We're coming here to show you we've got new faces, new vision, new direction. Here's our plan. And they were very bought into that. That's a great question, though. But I will never say the state's going to come in and shut it down. They're just going to impose fines upon you, and those fines go to nonprofits and charities and things of that nature. It's not necessarily going into the state's budget. They're not wanting to fine you. They want to work with you, which is why they gave us the 5-year extension. But when you go from a voluntary compliance agreement to an administrative order of consent, it just got real legal.
Gotcha. Other questions? Mr. Updike?
How do they come up with these figures on the ammonia testing? You said it's
Great
based on-
question.
Is it based on average on cities with the same kind of population or density, or?
I can answer the question. It's just so basically what they do, just like you go to the doctor, I'm going to try to make this very simple. You go to the doctor, they said you got high blood pressure. So what you need to do is you need to reduce your salt intake. So it's based upon what is your body responding to? What is your body saying? So basically wherever that creek that goes into there, imagine it gets a doctor's report and says, hey, that stream has high blood pressure, but it's ammonia. So you got to cut back on ammonia because it's unhealthy. Well, I'm not going to get into that topic, but I'm just going to say there's nothing necessarily that says that the creek has a problem, but how those parameters are established are very consistent across the state. Those are not inconsistent with what I've seen. In fact, Andrew will attest to this, maybe even Karen, those that were with us when we went to DNR. I asked the question about whether they were going to impose certain criteria because historically what I've seen in my career is that's not uncommon, but they had not done it in Missouri yet. So it's based upon a very consistent number, and I'm not saying that it's always scientific.
Would we have been in this situation if it's built on the south side?
Yes. You'd have been in this situation regardless of the side. In fact, I would actually say it's a great question. I'd actually tell you because if it's on the south side, it flows to Table Rock, which has a lot more restrictions because Springfield, Ozark, and Nixa all flow to the same thing. And what is around Table Rock Lake? Houses. So guess what runs from Table Rock Lake into that? Not for all those that ski out there, I just want to let you know that you are swimming in there. So Stockton, what do you not have?
The houses.
That's right. Just saying. Just remember that when you're swimming, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
I'm never going to Table Rock.
Mr. Franklin, you had questions?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I guess my question was just on the topography of everything. And for a long time, I've kind of known your elevation and the changes in Republic and how unique we are. So it's basically every expansion, even the $40 million expansion that we've left out of that, would everything north of town pretty much be a forced sewer main? Really there's no downhill to our current plant?
It's a great question. So you're hitting on a topic that's probably near and dear to our heart. We would prefer to have the $40 million project included in the overall scope, which is why we asked for the $150 million, so that we could have a line. I'm just going to show you. This is probably the best. Andrew, if I'm off, tell me. I think that's the spot. Running straight over here to N Highway, down like this. Ideally, you'd go through gravity through here and then pump. So this would be a green line across here and a blue line to there. So there's still a element of pumping to get back up there. But ideally, you would have all that area north of town completely bypassing, and I use this bypass in the correct term, not bypassing a treatment plant. You would bypass all this pumping and increase the life and longevity of this infrastructure here if you had another line that could come down this way. But that is like, in my ideal perfect state, if we had to say this is the perfect layout, that if we were not doing this tomorrow and it was turned over to the city, we'd say that's your ideal state. There would be one more line included in there. And that was, I believe, in the overall presentations, because those that have been here for a while, you saw that line included, but you're not seeing it tonight just because it's like, it's not worth it when you're talking that kind of money. I mean, now if we'd have landed the $100 million, successful in that effort, but we were the city that received the most. I'll say this: we were the city that received the most funding in the ARPA per a city for one lump sum. So I'm not negating that we got $25 million. Great questions. These are great questions.
Anybody else?
I would just like to say,
Yeah, Mr. Franklin.
no, I just didn't have a question. I would just like to say how beneficial this information is and how much I appreciate having this opportunity. I love learning, and there's so much to learn. Even when you've been here for a while, you get that chance to go over things again and kind of refresh yourself. And just bring yourself up to date with everything that's going on when we're talking to the constituents. And so I really appreciate this workshop opportunity.
Thank you. And I appreciate the comment. It triggers a thought for me too, as well, is that Andrew and the staff, and anytime I know most people don't want to go tour a wastewater plant, but you need to get out and see what you're paying for. Our citizens, I mean, they need to see this is an expensive piece. I know it's not the most elaborate. It's a great training tool for kids to see. This is stuff to learn. It's a trade. But anytime you want to go see where it's at, to understand the work that we're doing and the things that they're doing to make that better, to maximize and take care of your community, that's important.
I had a two-part question on growth. So this would put us in compliance now, and then we're gonna have to come back in 3 years. And with growth, are we out of like, how much cushion does that give us?
It's a great question. So what I love about the question is because what I love about our staff is they're constantly in contact with the engineering firm, giving them growth rates. So basically, when we started this endeavor, think about this, in 2017 and 2018, we were just thinking about how to get the stormwater out of the system. Then all of a sudden, we're getting momentum on the growth and momentum of the city. Obviously, June of 2020, the announcement of Amazon out north of town. So all of a sudden, we go from 60 houses in the community to 2,000, at least in some form of development. So Andrew sends that information to the engineers. They run their projections and say, hey, listen, that's information that's helpful to know because your growth rate projections have now drastically changed. What we were planning for you was a 5-year, had he not been sending that, what they were going to be providing to us, because those that were here from the beginning will remember this, the original cost of the plant was somewhere around 36 to 50. Mm-hmm. And now granted, but so when Andrew submitted the information to the engineers or Karen or Garrett, whatever staff member was constantly working with them, they said they've lost sleep themselves because they're like, David, this is a moving target your city is. You're growing so fast and taking care of it. So they built for us a growth rate projection that would handle it if we grew at 12.5% per year for the next 5 years using that term. Now, and so they built in for a 20-year growth projection. But the beauty of this plan, the beauty of what we've done, is it takes care of not only the growth of the city, the compliance that the mayor wants to stay out of jail on, but it also takes in consideration the compliance that may happen in the future. So it's not just taking care of the growth, it's taking care of three things. It's taking care of the past of 2011 with stormwater. It's taking care of the environmental compliance. Your driver's license is in good shape for 20 years. And it's taking care of the future. And so I believe it's one of those things that as the community continues to grow, so imagine if you had 2,000 homes at the rates the rates that are there, they're going to be generating a revenue that could happily go into paying for the future debt service of the community. And mind you, this city is still paying $5 million a year for the sewer out in Brookline. So it's bad. We're out of debt. Well, the great news is one thing the mayor will recall, we paid off their wastewater plant early. So we actually started building cash early to take care of some of this.
So the second part, the growth, you mentioned the growth in revenue. So I'm assuming as your other projections, the income growth is estimated off of a marginal growth of the city, the income side of.
Yes. So again, I'll just a recap of that. We built for a 20% growth in population, but only encapsulated a 3% growth in revenue. So we took a very conservative approach, just like we do budgeting every year. So if that grows by 12%, 13%, whatever, naturally we'll take it. But a conservative approach versus saying, oh, we're going to grow at 10% a year, and all of a sudden you're at 3%, and you're going back to the ratepayers saying, oops, we don't do that. It's a great question.
Mr. Cameron?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Please.
Go ahead.
Is that something where, based on administration, the environmental compliance can fluctuate and change one way or another to where it's always a moving target?
Great question. So these are great. This is like I probably should have planned an hour, but so the way the law, the attorneys in the room, is called anti-backsliding or you can't go backwards.
Okay.
So regardless if administrations change, so historically, the Republican Party's probably been more reserved on environmental policy, and what you saw is in the previous administration, President Trump suspended a lot of the environmental policy, so we were not moving at a fast track once the new administration takes in. This is not a political statement, it's just how it typically ebbs and flows over my experience. Those policies were picked back up and put on like, hey, you need to get going and moving on those. So they can pick them up. But what will never happen is those, they call it anti-backsliding, and it's written into 40 CFR, it's a law, but basically says you can never, if the speed limit's 55 and it goes to 35, it'll never go back to 55 miles ever. And so it's like, you can't do it. So you're run up against a law, and so, yeah. Fought that issue many, many miles in Washington. It's a great question. Great questions.
Mr. Mayor, and I'll be quick. I just had to spawn another question. What is it? How do we treat it for ammonia? What part of the sewer treatment system is taking out the ammonia?
Okay, a good question. Now I'm not gonna. I promise staff and everybody I would not geek out on these, but I'll just show you. I'll show you the. Oops, I went back a slide. I'll show you the process. It's called denitrification. I'm not going to go through the whole nitrification process, but in the nitrification process, this is a basin. So it goes in there, it rotates, there's a lot of bugs in there, and they consume it as food. And basically that's where the ammonia is taken up. And so it's happening in that basin right there. Then it flows into that basin right there, and all that stuff comes up in the middle of that little pipe right there, and it just settles. All the bugs get happy, fat, and sassy. They weigh too much, and they sink to the bottom. And ammonia is taken up. How's that for a 30-second? Mayor?
Perfect. One more.
Yeah, I expect an attaboy on this one.
Super fast. So how is the total Kidal nitrogen?
Keldol, yeah, you go.
Where does that, is that from that same process that the ammonia is coming out?
So no. So Keldol nitrogen. So basically, phosphorus cannot be removed in this because you have to have I hate to geek out on you, but it's an anoxic zone. You have to have a no air zone. So there's air. Golly, there's air. Sorry. I'm glad you guys see this picture in there, y'all. Now we got some real education going on. See, we need to go to a tour.
Absolutely.
So basically what this is there's things that look like paddles, like riverboat paddle, like the bell boats, whatever. They have the paddles on the back. It moves this water in a circle, creates paddle boats, Mayor, he says it. And it moves this water in a circle. It creates dissolved air in there. So what happens is it would leave that zone and go into one that is called anoxic, which means it's no air. And from there, that's what you would have. I'm giving this like, those would say like you're skipping over a lot of key parts. I'm just making it very simple. Sure. Then what happens, it goes into an anoxic zone, means there's no air, back into an aerobic zone, and that's how you have nitrification, how you get rid of TKN and phosphorus. And that's a very broad answer.
Is that something that we've taken into consideration with that total cost, or is it something
yes,
we
sir.
don't even know we have? Okay.
100%. Yeah, you go back to that slide. You go back to this slide right here. So this slide, whenever they say monitor, it's telling me they're asking us for 5 years. We want you just to test it, but there's no limit over here. Just test it and tell us how fast your car goes. Our car is going 7. Well, we need you to get to a 1 now. Our car can't get down to a 1. Well, guess what? You better put a governor on it. It's got to slow down. And governors in wastewater plants cost about $90 million. Just saying.
Mr. Updike.
I know this might be a little redundant, but is there a possibility of building like a smaller plant, wastewater plant, to kind of save the one we have now, or is it just build another one and
no
the possibility of one?
So great question. We're all going to be all we're doing is expanding the existing site, because if we try to build another one, or even not, we're going to utilize a lot of the existing site. This is not a brand new plant. We're going to utilize all the concrete structure we got out there and maximize every square foot of that bad boy. But I will say this, maybe not in my lifetime, but there will be a second wastewater plant in Republic. Have to be. Most likely down on N Highway. Andrew probably say south. Go ahead.
The only revenue source to support, if you take on bonds or other debt to service is just from the service charge. Is that correct? Or how does the funding source work to?
So yeah, you could take it. Quite frankly, that's why the legislature has different things. I hate using. You're asking the question. I'll just provide you all the alternatives. You have your sewer fees, but you cannot take funds out of street fees or anyone else. You're not allowed to transfer it that way. However, the legislature has things like they have, like we have a capital improvement sales tax that expires in 2027 that it's made for if you want to do capital improvements. So it's essentially in 2027, the option, because we've talked about every option, is what happens if in 2027 we don't citizens like, I don't want to raise my rates anymore. Just update that sales tax and make it all about the wastewater plant and not do what we did back in 2017. So the legislature has allocations for capital improvement projects specifically to a project. So you could, and the citizens could in 2027 say, hey, listen, I don't want any more rate increases. I'd rather just renew that tax to pay the remainder portion of the wastewater plant.
And then on that, the amount that we're short, the source from that, we are projecting it to be what? The 30 million we're short from the total project, yeah.
37 million.
Do what? Additional 25 from ARPA.
Okay, so great question, and I'll be brief. Should we receive the additional 25, we would be short 12,500. That was the point, that if instead of asking for a rate increase now to cover the $12 million or 13 million, it would be 12,250. 12,250,000. Better make that very clear. Was hopefully that the growth of the city would help cover the debt service through the growth of the new customers that were coming in, instead of, because we're basing that on so many customers that we have now. So we would recalculate the fee schedule. Let me be clear about the fee schedule. The fee schedule was something we paid engineering firms and actual experts on financial modeling to do for us. We did not just pull out an Excel spreadsheet and start hopping at it. It was a lot of work.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're fine. The only I think for most people, the closest they'll get to this is just seeing the number on the bill, right?
Yeah.
Just being, is there relief in sight? You mentioned the numbers were put together by a firm, but does that end? Do they start to go the opposite direction at some point?
No, I will say this, and I love the question, because this is something I think is missed at a lot of levels at our level. I think that education to the citizens, that why I brought up the point that you will see your utility bills look more like your cell phone bill, is because that's literally, it's just not been treated as such, and the rules are changing, and they're not going down, they're going up. And so those are beyond our control, so the rates are not going down. This is not a declining scale on this one. It's like your electric bill. The more they keep changing it to clean energy, again, it's not a political statement, it's just a fact. The more it continues to go up, we're going to pay higher prices for it.
Okay.
Great question.
When was our last rate increase?
Well, it was 2011, but the last one started, it was 2022, but that's something we voted on, was January of this year.
That's right.
So, but before that was 2011, 2013.
We approved rate increases in 2011 that went through 2014. So the last implemented was 2014.
So it was 8 years in between them.
Any other questions? Ms. Poole?
To educate the citizens on what you've told us tonight, would it be feasible to have a meeting for them and explain this?
Yeah, what we've done tonight is we've recorded this meeting so that they can view it. We could direct them.
That's not like saying, come and do it in person.
I would be more than happy. I have no problem giving presentations, as you all know. I would love to, if someone has questions, to cover that, to do that. That is not a problem at all. It's a great point.
I think that would be one of the ways that would be satisfied. They're not satisfied right now, you know.
Yeah, I've heard all about the sewer rates from my first day here. I just hate to be the one that has to say I know why, and I want to make sure everybody else knows why.
Yeah,
Not blaming anybody, just saying it's an uphill road, no pun intended.
but I was just thinking of like an information meeting for
Yes.
for the public.
Well, what I duly noted, yeah, we can do that. We'll be having a discussion on the rates, but we'll be more than happy to have just a public forum on the projects themselves.
All right. With that, I think that addresses everyone's issues and questions. Mr. Cameron, thank you for the presentation this evening. Are there any closing thoughts?
No, thank you for the time. I appreciate you all. I mean, I know you're all busy. I know getting off work, you all have private jobs, lives to do that, but to have you come out here at 5 o'clock to do that, to the staff that pulled this together, Steffi, and everybody that got this ready for you all, and my little piece of pipe and my little cup, I appreciate you letting me just take about an hour of your time, but that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. We will take a 5-minute break before